comics is an incredible culture, something at the intersection of literature, art and cinema storyboard. How comics appeared as an entertainment. How comics affected on people, influenced humanity in cinematography. All this you will know in my video. It's Karina and we begin. People have always sought to communicate through pictures, tell and memorize stories. This is one of the means of communication. Drawings evoke in us a huge number of emotions, from joy or sadness or anger. Japanese manga artist Osamu Tezuka said comics are an international language. They can cross boundaries and generations. Comics are a bridge between all cultures. Since early beginning of life, people use rock drawings to communicate. It crossed years and gave us great sightseeing masterpiece. Johann Column in Rome, Italy, narrates about the life of soldiers, women, and military campaigns. In Germany, 1462, there was even a Bible for poor, created that considered entirely of pictures and text descriptions. It was made specifically for poor who could not read. In the USSR, another format similar to comics was popular. In the 1980s, film strips were produced in millions of copies. As film slides for viewing through the projector, usually it was used for the informational or educational purposes, just as a sequence of pictures with text but without dialogue bubbles, cinematic composition or complex drama. At the time, there was an Iron Curtain in the USSR, and the inhabitants of the country knew nothing about the other cultures. My parents always were sharing stories how they were buying some music records from the black market, like Metallica or the Beatles. But a couple of years later, in the 1990s, comics began to be imported to Russia, and this industry began to develop there as well. In 1967, William Hogarth, the man who first began to draw political cartoons and series of paintings narrating about the life of prostitutes and members of high society. In Great Britain in 1984, a comic strip was published under the name Alice Sloper Half Holiday, with the first central character, and all the stories are happening around him. Despite this work, and father of comics industry in English-speaking countries used to expect Richard Felton Alcott with his famous work The Yellow Kid in 1985. It was a modern comic template. It contained a bold for speech, dialogues, humor, and broad format. The origins of comics is medieval Japan. First manga in Japan appeared in 12th and 13th century in a series of drawings like frogs and rabbits titled Shogugiga, Scrolls of Rockland Animals, produced by several artists. In fact, their technique of drawing of characters' legs to simulate running was adopted by many mangaka makers, and comic book artists working today. During the Edo period, 1603-1867, another book of drawings, Toba Ehon, embodied the concept of manga. This stone was first used in 1798 to describe the picture book Shijinu Kikai, 4 Seasons by Santo Kudon. In 1914, it showed up again as a title of Aikawanina, Manga Hyakujo, and celebrated Hokusai manga books of drawings and the famous ukiyo-e artist Hokusai. In the United States, comic book industry began to develop in early 20th century. Initially, this literature was perceived as exclusively for children, but in 30s, superhero comics appeared and began to actively gain popularity. Although modern manga came to them at an expansion of artistic creativity during the US occupation of Japan in 1945 till 1952, their origins can be traced centuries back. The Americans brought their own comics and cartoons, such as Disney Works, Mickey Mouse, Betty Boop, Bambi, thus leaving a great impression on mangaka to be. The Japanese artists subsequently gave life in their own styles, primarily within newspapers and magazines, which sought readership. And this then evolved into dedicated weekly and monthly magazines, which was carried a collection of about 10 or 20 series installments per edition. Among the first and nowadays most successful manga artists were Osamu Tezuka with his famous Astro Boy and Meshika Hisawa with his Sezai-san. Tezuka, known as a god of manga and godfather of anime, invented the distinctive large eyes prominent in both fields. Astro Boy, for instance, embodies the aesthetic and such as it quickly became and remained immensely beloved in Japan and elsewhere. On the other hand, the anime adaptation of Hisawa, Sezai-san, drew more viewers than any other anime on Japanese television in 2011. In 1933, writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Sugar has been developing the story of Superman, hoping to sell it as syndicated newspaper comic strip, but after years of fruitless soliciting to the syndicates, they agreed to publish the story as a comic book. In March 1938, Siegel and Shuster sold all rights of Superman to the Detective Comics, later DC Company. Initially, the main character was Bill Dunn, who had superpower after using drugs. But after, they decided to rewrite the story in order to sell to the Detective Company a comic strip for $130. $2,390 when adjusted for inflation. From this point, the golden age of comics begins. Batman appears in the wake of Superman. His feature is a lack of superpower, which compensated by having huge finances. The creators of Batman are Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Bob got all the fame. He have parceled the work of his partner as his own. Captain Marvel dislodged the Superman and Batman from the pedestal, a 12-year-old boy who could turn into a grown man named Shazam.
Nah, I was just seeing if you were paying attention.
For 10 years, he beat the popularity of Superman. This continued until they seized the company that created Shazam. Marvel was accused of replicating Superman. As a result, all authors and artists who painted Marvel were fired. The hero disappeared. Often they were patriotic and propaganda stories, as it was with Captain America, who was created specifically to maintain the patriotic spirit of American soldiers during the Second World War. It was invented by writer Joe Simon and artist Jack Kirby. For all the time, according to the various estimates, more than 210 million comics with Captain America have been sold. Everyone has heard the story of Steve Rogers, who wanted to defend his homeland but could not because of his frail health. Then he was offered to take an experimental serum. After an experiment, he received superpowers and went to defend his country, what he did on the pages of comics. That's how people were inspired by showing how easily superheroes deal with evil, throwing away fears from the people and giving confidence. At the same time, a superhero girl appears, Wonder Woman. Her creator was William Moulton Marston, who had previously invented a polygraph, usually referred to as a lie detector test. That's where her main weapon is the soul of truth. The main genres were science fiction, detective stories, and humor strips. The world then experienced difficult events and their consequences. World War I, Great Depression, Second World War. The news agenda was already full of wacky news, and comics diffused the atmosphere and entertained people. In the comics, they fought against Hitler and Axis power, and always won. This calmed many readers and gave them faith. Despite the obvious success of comics, sales dropped dramatically in the aftermath of war years. People returned to their usual life, and image of superhuman no longer needed. It seemed this is the end of comics boom. But heroes started getting their fame crime and horror comics. In the early 1950s, American psychologist Frederick Wertham published a monograph, The Seduction of Innocent. He accused the creators of comics of molestations of adolescents and youth, as well as propaganda of terror and violence. The book had a huge outcry in the public, and US government forced most of the publishers to sign the CCA, Comics Code Authority.
In this comic book is a love story, a boy and girl in love. They get married And after an offensively lurid description, illustrated, of course, of the couple's wedding night, the book shows how the bride murders her husband by chopping his head off with an axe. So, let's talk to some experts on comic books. And your name, son?
Bernie Kenner.
And how old are you, Bernie?
15.
15. And you read comic books too,
Yes.
don't you? Do they bother you in any way?
At first they did.
How'd they bother you?
It was bad dreams at night. Used to
Mhm.
talk in my sleep.
Used to talk in your sleep?
Yes.
Tell me about some of the stories you've read in
I
comic
read
books.
this one about this lady. She always liked diamonds, so she used to dig these.
Soon, horror comics lost their interest in the audience, and the superheroes returned back.
You throw another moon at me, and I'm gonna lose it.
Silver Age of Comics. It all started with the appearance of the character Flash, created by Barry Allen. Flash immediately entered the top characters that everyone knew. This happened because of the unique stories, nice pictures, and elaborate characters. Then comes the well-known to most comic book fans, Stanley Lieber.
Hi, heroes. This is Stan Lee coming at you. Want you to know, Marvel has always been and always will be a reflection of the world right outside our window.
Or just Stan Lee. It was he who brought comics to the next level in 1960s. One of his first works as a comic strip, Fantastic Four, a story about people who have acquired incredible abilities. The highlight of his work was that the characters did not hide their identities, as it was with the previous classic characters. And also they constantly swore that made them more real and close to the audience. Stan Lee creates the Hulk, that was originally painted in grey, but due to the mediocre paints in comics, Stan Lee decided to paint it in green. He then creates the Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and many others appear. Stan Lee thought that each character had huge commercial success and potential. That's why he decided to create one team out of all of them. He called it Avengers. And subsequently he began getting more and more fans, gradually transferring each story to the screen later. Bronze Age of Comics. It began with the death of Queen Stacy, woman whom Spider-Man dated. This shocked the audience. Initially, superheroes were invincible and always won enemies. At this time, the main character, for the first time, suffered from such serious defeat. This event influenced the subsequent realism in the comic book universe. From now on, they cover adult topics such as drug use, alcoholism, and environmental pollution. Chapter: Oversaturation of the comics market. By the early 2000s, comics book took their next round of their development and made their own way to the internet. Various web comics, those were originally intended and to be published on the internet. And memes are emerging. An interest in comics increases even more. Foreign works have become more accessible than before. Enthusiasts who love the stories starts to translate it on their own. Hilarious storylines coexist with the dark and noir. The shows filled with thousands of comics, if not more. Fans did not have time to follow the events and change their interest to more suitable one for their busy schedule. After all, the world at this time was full of various entertaining art and works. Marvel's biggest blow came in early 1992 when 7 of the most successful award-winning artists, Todd McFarlane, known for his work Spider-Man, Jim Lee, X-Men, Rob Liefeld, X-Force, Mark Silvestri, Wolverine, Eric Larsen, The Amazing Spider-Man, Jim Valentino, Guardians of the Galaxy, William Portacio left the country to find their own successful company, Image Comics. 90s were notable for use of various techniques to increase comic book sales, such as different cover styles, various cover enhancements, swimsuit issues. Marvel began selling Marvel Universe cards, collectible cards depicting characters and events of the Star Wars universe, produced by the card company Skybox International. Another common practice for Marvel during this period was crossovers, with the involvement of the entire universe, which wrapped chaotic on his hot picture. In 1996, the crossover Untold Saga was released. They were featured almost all comics. This allowed Marvel to reboot several of the leading characters in the universe, such as the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, were the directors of the Marvel. Now, Image Comics stars Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld were given permission to restart the comics from scratch. However, shortly after the launch, sales quickly dropped below the expected levels, and Marvel closed the experiment after a year of work on it. Here, Marvel declared for bankruptcy. January 4, 1996, Marvel laid off 275 employees. In 1986, Ronald Perlman issued shares of the company on the New York Stock Exchange, guaranteed by Merrill Lynch and First Boston Corporation. Taking advantage of the rapidly growing stock market, Ronald Perlman issued a series of junk bonds that he used to acquire maggot-backed children's entertainment companies. In 1997, Toy Biz, as the name suggests, the company was in charge of games, dolls, and based on the Marvel comics. The mag decided to end bankruptcy by forming new corporations, Marvel Enterprises. Together with business partner Avi Arad, published Bill James, and editor-in-chief Bob Harris, Perlman helped bring Marvel back to life. The cinematic universe started with the film Iron Man in 2008, and all what happened after, from the point of view of films and art, I suppose you know. There's a lot of people still thinking about comics as a childish product, well, mostly in European and West part of the world, which is quite different from East part of the world, where you can find a lot of adults reading manga in the subway. Well, I don't think these people will watch this video, but in case you're gonna meet them, I'm gonna give you a few world-renowned graphic novels narrating on their pages in pictures about serious topics of humanity. Mouse, Art Spiegelman, graphic novel tells the story of the life of the Polish Jew who survived in the Holocaust. The story unfolds in two time periods: the life of the protagonist before and during the Second World War. Mouse is unique in its style. People are depicted in it with animal heads. Jews are represented as mice. Germans are represented as cats. The novel is based on the true story of the author's father. In 1992, Art Spiegelman received the Pulitzer Prize for this book. Persepolis, Margin Satrapi. This autobiographical graphic novel shows through the eyes of the child the dramatic history of the Iran, the Shah regime and the Islamic Revolution, the war with the Iraq. There will be the first love, friendship and betrayal. Moving to Europe and then back to Iran, in 2007 a feature-length animated film based on the novel was shot, which won a special jury prize in Cannes and was nominated for Oscar. Ganges, Kevin Heisen. A series of 6 comic strips published as a newspaper by American artist Kevin Heisen. According to the plot, the hero, Glenn Ganges, suffers from insomnia. Most of the series is the character's thoughts. In the first book, Glenn travels into the past, and the next, into his subconscious. And in the third, he talks about the book he read. Along the way, he can learn about the history of geology. The plot changes quickly, jumps from the topic to topic, sometimes get very confused, like the thoughts of a person trying to sleep. Heisinger is actively experimenting with the possibilities of comics. pages that are more classical in structure are combined with the experimental ones where frames are either absent altogether or superimposed on each other or give rise to some kind of new structure. Here, Richard Macquarie. Richard Macquarie's book does not have the usual division into frames and does not tell any hero. It tells the story at a specific place and its history. The same corner of the room is shown on 300 pages of comics. You can trace how the heroes who populate the house replace each other, how the house is built and destroyed over time. Macquarie uses pages spaced in curious way. Frames overlap, creating temporary halls. On one page, while life and homeliness coexist, and on the next, the time difference will be just a few seconds. The collection of experimental comics created by Art Spiegelman in 1972 till 1977 is essentially a book within a book. The first part is a result for a comic autobiography, in which the author explains what influenced his formation as an artist and how he came up with the ideas for the comics that are below. The second part is the comics themselves, but in very different matters and styles, all about unobvious decisions and research of former boundaries. Patience, Daniel Close. Murder mysteries, time travel, thoughts of family, love and death. All This is a graphic novel by Daniel Close. In 2002, he was nominated for the Academy Award for the Best Adapted Screenplay for the screenplay The Phantom World, based on his own comic strip. Jimmy Corrigan, The Smartest Kid on Earth by Chris Weir. Steve Jobs, Insanely Great by Jesse Hotland. Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and a lot of others. I look forward to your comments of your favorite comic strip, manga, or movie, or graphic novel. Please give us your personal recommendations to spend more time on research in this area and be familiar with this art. It was Karina K. See you soon. I forgot to say, if you want a video from me, history of manga, please leave a comment as well. Bye.
Look at all these alternative comic book creators. Alan Moore, Art Spiegelman, Dan Clowes. I really identified with the girls in Ghost World. They made me feel like I wasn't so alone.
Yeah, whatever.